I'm the executive director there for prevention supports and services, and you'll see in a few minutes kind of how we're organized in Placer County. What we're going to do is take a little bit of a deep dive and expand off of what Lisa so wonderfully demonstrated, the different funding streams. And we're going to look at how Placer is implementing our mental health supports, what kind of money are we using, how do we blend braid that money. I'm going to show you a tool we use to organize those dollars. And please continue eating. And here we go. So as you recall yesterday, Placer County is a children's systems of care design. We've been a children's system of care for 30 years, 30 plus years. And so some of this comes in the context of our collaboration has been happening for a long time. So you'll see funding sources on here and think, well, why does social services do that? Or why do you do this for social services? And it comes back to the theme that so many of the presenters have talked about. It's part systems and part relationship, and you have to have both to make this work. There's a link on these slides. I think Elizabeth or somebody's going to send them out so you can be connected to resources for system of care and other things. Okay, here we go. Current mental health initiatives in Placer County. Let me move the screen here so you can see this a little bit. We have a strong focus in Placer of getting across the sidewalk, of looking at the whole child and supporting children anywhere along the continuum of wellness. So I'm going to start out with our wellness programs. We talked a little bit about that yesterday, and we have multiple funding streams that we're using to support the initiation of wellness centers in Placer County. But like I was talking to the Rockland School District folks a few minutes ago, we want to expand wellness center across the county. Every school, I think, should have a wellness center or a community school, whatever you want to call them, on their campus. So our programs are funded by a triage grant. So we had one of the first grants to support wellness in the state. MHSSA came along. We funded a few more wellness centers. So we started in Roseville, moved to Auburn. And then Sutter Health Foundation said, hey, we heard about what you were doing. We really like that. We want to help support students. How can we help you build a wellness center in our Colfax community, which is a one school, one district, principal, superintendent place. And they agreed to give us $500,000 to fund another wellness center. So philanthropy kicked in some dollars. The school district kicked in some ESSER dollars. And so that wellness center in Colfax for those 280 students who don't have access to many, if any, mental health services opened up this week. And then we have LEA cost recovery. So we have some school districts now can't quite open a wellness center, but they have funds to put a mental health specialist or a practitioner on campus and start that journey. So there's a variety of funding strategies, and Lisa talked about some of those. Positive behavior interventions and supports. Some of you may know me as the PBIS guy for the state, but in Placer County, it's co-funded by the LEAs and by Mental Health Services Act. So MHSA in Placer County has been funding PBIS for the last 9 years. We reiterate, we reteach, we bring on new schools, but every year about 52 schools or so in Placer County are funded through MHSA. Kaiser Foundation also funds us to do that work. Mental health community integrated supports, you can see there, is funded through MHSA. And what does that mean, Mike? The county children's system of care gives me some dollars to work with community-based agencies to get them on a school site. So we use some MHSA dollars to place or plant or seed community-based agencies on school sites. Sounds easier than it really is, but there's lots of Programmatic things, we've talked about share of information and lots of barriers. The county office role is to help work that out. And then ECE, we fund a person to participate in early childhood mental health services in Placer. And if you click on that link, you'll see it again pop up in this presentation. There's a lot of dollars available through ECE to support integrated mental health for our 0 to 5 population. Coordinated mental health, coordinator for mental health. So you'll see here, we funded a position through ESSER, and her whole job is to help me drive towards sustainability and build out our program across Placer County. I'm sorry. I do. I'll get to it. I will, I promise. Transition Partnership Plus, TPP, I did spell out that acronym, is an opportunity through the Department of Rehabilitation. And this may blow your mind if you don't have a program like this. And I'll simplify the math. If I give $100,000 to the Department of Rehabilitation at the state, they send me $300,000 back. So $100,000 to get $300,000 to support children who have a diagnosis that's interfering with their ability to get a job. So mental health service, effectively, right? Not a direct clinical therapeutic service, but a game changer for those students. Renew, rehabilitation for empowerment of natural supports in education and work is funded in Placer through Mental Health Services Act. Game changer opportunity for transition age youth to get jobs. So you can see lots of varieties of funding streams that are leveraged. Handle with Care is a project, and there's a video there of helping educators link with first responders to notify the educator if the child has experienced a traumatic event. So many times kids will come to school and not have acting out behaviors or internalizing behaviors and not be noticed by the school. So Handle with Care is a way to notify the school that this child has experienced an event that might have been adverse or traumatizing. Please be a good adult and help your kids. Sutter Health Foundation funds that. Request for assistance is an opportunity that started in Placer County where any school district can fill out a form, let us know, I'm really struggling with this family, with this student. Are there supports available, whether it's food, housing, mental health supports, and we kind of triage at our office how to better help the school navigate, because a lot of times the schools aren't the experts of what every service is in a county. So we have a triage system through a referral, electronic referral system. CSEC, we're funded to prevent the sexual exploitation of kids. It comes through our Department of Social Services or system of care. They fund a full FTE in Placer County to bring that education, help educate educators on how to identify symptoms or risk factors for students who might be vulnerable to sexual exploitation or trafficking, and so we do that. Coordinated suicide prevention training happens, and on, and you'll see what's on the minds of a lot of people here. Student Behavioral Health Incentive Plan, new to many of us, will be started in Placer County, and we have a real strong collaboration with our MCPs. Alicia Pimenton was here yesterday, but we're going to be looking at using those dollars to help offset the cost of our wellness centers and then grow wellness throughout Placer County. Deep breath. That's part of what we do. But as Lisa said, and so eloquently pointed out, funding mental health in isolation doesn't work by itself. We need to look at other funding streams. What happens is it ends up looking like this, right? It's just a glob, a mess, because we're operating oftentimes in silos. It gets a little better. We can thread those together sometimes, but it begins to look like this. We're on the path of improvement. Or oftentimes in counties, we get really good at this work, but it's still little tight balls of silos, right? We're not integrated, we're not collaborated. All of the funding stream, and I was on a call this morning with the Assembly Budget Committee, and they were asking in implementation of our community schools and all the programs that you've heard about over the last few days, CYBHI, and how could they improve things? And it's collaboration, because the expectation, and we've heard, is that we collaborate. We have these meetings, but at the state, it's still coming down in these silos. What it should look like is this. We should be able to braid and blend funding percentages, and I think Lisa had a discussion when she was up here about, well, what percentage of Medi-Cal do we bill versus what is the LCFF funding? That changes daily. If you've run any of these programs, it depends on Medi-Cal students showing up to your center. It depends on, is it a billable service? Oh, hell, it depends if the clinician actually wrote the note. So your LCFF funding could change every single day. There's going to be an equilibrium, an average, but there's holidays, there's winter break. I still have to pay for staff. They have 2 weeks off. They're not billing at 80% or 60% or whatever your billable time is. So we need to braid and blend those fundings together in order to have improved outcomes. Okay. Opportunities for sustainability. I'm going to show you a few slides here with some links on how we can start thinking about collaboration and braiding and blending funding a little differently. But I wanted to start with just really changing the ecology first. If we can teach adults to understand mental health and wellness and identify students' trauma and be trauma informed, we're going to have a better opportunity at helping kids earlier on in a preventative way and decreasing the use on the deep end of the system. We need every adult to understand Tier 1 services, early supports for students. We need to look at things critically in a multi-tiered system structure like Lisa was showing. And we need to integrate behavioral health and mental health together. So is that a behavioral problem? Is that a mental health problem? Well, oftentimes simple behavioral problems end up in special education or as ED diagnoses and deep end of the system because we don't have strong universal supports in place. So I encourage schools to do things like MTSS and PBIS. Other opportunities for support and sustainability. Seek alternative funding sources. So think about funding in two ways. There's ongoing continual funding and then there's soft funding. And don't discount the relationships with community-based agencies, faith-based agencies, with other nonprofits, with philanthropy, or we had a new engineering company move to Placer County and they wanted to help support kids. It's part of their mission. And so they just wrote us a check for our wellness centers for $20,000 because we're out there, we're talking about wellness, we're talking about how important it is. Sure, that's not going to support a staff person, but it supported the bean bags, the stuff that make the room smell friendly and zen-like. I don't know. Nikki Parr does a good job at creating those spaces. But you know what I mean, making it a welcoming space for students. So don't discount community nonprofits or community-based agencies. Collaboration with managed care partners. So really working in an assertive way with your managed care plans and being able to be collaborative. And I know for many counties, this has been a struggle because in education, many of us are new at understanding what a managed care plan even is. So when SB HIP rolled out, we had no idea, what does a managed care plan do? Why are we talking about partnering with them? So we want to be sure that we're able to establish those relationships in an honest way and a collaborative process to make decisions about how to use SB-HIP. I'm happy to help folks if you're stuck with your managed care partners, unstick to move that forward. The next funding sources that I think are good to look at is Medi-Cal. Lisa talked a little bit about this, but there's several different forms of Medi-Cal. There's EPSDT, and I think the next slide will show it a little bit better. We'll go into the different types of Medi-Cal, but looking at Medi-Cal as well as MHSA in your partnerships. Every county starting their 3-year cycle for community interest-based discussions on how we use MHSA. So if you're an educator and you don't know what MHSA is, you should Google it in your county, and you'll find out that there's community convenings that education's supposed to be part of to look at how we're using MHSA funding. So regarding Medi-Cal, like I said, there's different types. There's EPSDT, there's LEA Medi-Cal, there's administrative Medi-Cal. You can talk to Chris Williams, he's somewhere in the room, about federally qualified health centers and how they leverage Medi-Cal through federally qualified health centers. So you can click on those links. But like Lisa said, it won't pay for the whole program. You need to look at local control dollars, MHSA, or other funding strategies to offset that cost. In PCOE, we took a real hard look at redesigning how we use Medi-Cal and maybe a more methodical process. We've evaluated, for instance, every single employee. Are they eligible for SMA, administrative Medi-Cal, or not? Should they be billing individual Medi-Cal? And we were astonished to find out how many employees could have been billing SMA that weren't included. They just kind of came on, you know, people change, and they weren't being included in the billing. So for us, I put an example there. We get about $80,000 quarterly to do SMA. A lot of counties and districts don't even bill administrative Medi-Cal. It's really pretty easy. There's not a lot of, it's not high risk, but you're not going to pass up $80,000 a quarter that can be used flexibly either. So I encourage people to look at SMA. LEA Medi-Cal and targeted case management, you can click on those links, find out more. We're taking a very cautious approach because there is a little bit more risk. So we used some tools we learned in improvement science. I was talking to Nikki about improvement science earlier. But we created a process map because we wanted to see from the point of a student coming into a wellness center to the billable minute, do we have the right forms in place? Do we have the right process in place? Do we have a system that can sustain, or what percentage of the cost is offset by LEA targeted case management? So what we're doing with our provider or third-party vendor is a practice system to see how much money, how much revenue will we generate to offset the cost before we start billing in the regular system. So we created kind of a fake billing system to see, well, how much of that percentage are we really going to be able to claim, and then how much needs to be paid by LCFF or MHSA or some other cost before we dive too deep into the pool. So I encourage you to use a process map. Other opportunities for sustainability, the rules for LEA BOP have changed, or LEA targeted case management have changed, and you can now bill students who are not in special education. So that door has opened up a lot for you too. Another door that's opened up is special education or ERMS funding. During COVID, the law changed, and some of you may know this or may not, but you can now fund non-special education services under the last item here, other mental health related services not required by IDEA. So students who have a mental health need that are not designated in special ed, you can fund and provide services for those students. You can also fund things like PBIS training or prevention through the second to the last bullet, behavioral interventions. Those of you Bill ERMs are saying, there's no money there, Mike, we can't do that, it costs so much right now. But it costs so much because we're not doing prevention. And so at some point, we have to work collaboratively to get ahead of that, right? I talked a little bit about LCFF already, Title I, funding is available, and then Maureen asked what's ESSER, but I had to refer to the slide because truthfully I forgot what the acronym meant. Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Referral Fund. So ESSER was dollars that county offices and school districts got to mitigate the impact of COVID. So these are okay dollars, it's a lot of them, but they sunset too. So how do we leverage these dollars in order to create sustainable funding? For us, I went to my CFO and said, I cannot do this. Like, I cannot help school districts create a sustainable fund in mental health without another person. So will you fund a coordinator to help me over the next 3 years, help schools and districts become and be able to create systems that are more sustainable? And much to my surprise, he said yes. It literally was a 5-minute conversation because he has the foresight to know that it takes a little bit of manpower, person power, to go a long way. And so if you have additional funding, whether it's through MHSA, MHSSA, or any of the other acronym soup of funding that we've talked about over the last 3 days, that might be a worthwhile investment for you. Many districts are receiving some one-time funding through the SEL Cal Hope grant. Those dollars are one-time, and I'd encourage using those dollars to invest in systems of support, and investing in people with those dollars might not be a good strategy because they do sunset and there's not a lot of them. Here again is early childhood. Please go to those links. Partner with your early childhood ECE or First Five or whoever's doing early childhood work in your county because you can generate some funding to offset the cost. In addition, we have to start thinking outside of the bubble a little bit. So this is our org chart for Placer County. Steve said I had 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go fast. We have about 55 staff. When I got there 8 years ago, we had 4 staff. So we've grown a little bit in a short period of time to provide improved services to our districts. And we did that because we braid and blend funding. I don't get funding where I say, oh, I could hire an FTE just to do this. So you're gonna see a lot of these staff have multiple jobs, multiple roles. On the left side, or I guess it might be your, yeah, it's probably your left side too. We have our mental health supports, foster youth, ILP, TPP I talked about, school climate, and then on the right, we were just awarded a state grant for SEL. The key to looking at this is you see a lot of people, but those of you who are fiscal folks from your counties, this is all under one budget responsibility. So instead of having multiple budget responsibilities where managers might say, oh, those are my dollars or those are my dollars, we keep it under one and we need to collaborate together about how to deliver the best services for students. So it ends up looking like this. We're using funding services for mental health or wellness across our department. We're using TUPE, McKinney-Vento, FYS, and we braid those services together in that array of program delivery and funding streams. This will blow your mind. It's actually changed. This is my budget spreadsheet. I blurred it, so don't try and strain your eyes because it'd be weird showing what each staff gets paid to a large audience. But we have 33 now, it's changed just in a few weeks, 33 different funding streams for those 55 staff across one budget responsibility. And many of you who work with counties, or whether it's social services or county offices, we get kind of locked into a system, a fiscal system that isn't very maneuverable, and you can't look at predictive maps, you can't look at changes. So using this spreadsheet, I'm able to do experiments, if you will, and say, okay, I'm losing 2P dollars, but I'm gaining MHSA dollars. What does that look like? What does that percentage look like? And we can literally just plug that in to see, how can I fund that staff person? How can I make a change? Or I found out the other day that we're getting additional dollars. Well, where can I stick those additional dollars in this throughout our budget to make it fit right? So I'm happy to go and dive a little deeper with folks offline. We've talked to Shasta and Santa Cruz County to really look at, can you use a spreadsheet like this to more, to braid and blend funding in a more detailed way. This is a smaller version. I'm happy to send this to you if you want to use it, but it's a way of kind of organizing those supports. And then lastly, I wrote down some opportunities for sustainability. We want to increase attendance. Since I wrote this presentation, this may change a little bit for California. There's some legislation to stop funding schools based off of ADA and fund them off of enrollment. So that's a big game change for school districts. From an equity perspective, it's much better. So we can say, you know, we have 2,000 students at that school, but only 1,500 are showing up. Take those dollars and focus on getting those other 500 students to schools by improving programs and things like that. The other funding sources: decrease suspensions, expulsions, of course, increase academic outcomes, improve systems for prevention, PBAS, MTSS structures, more complete use of special education funding. So really looking at it in a real way. Are we utilizing special ed dollars to the most benefit of all students? Decreasing special education cost for youth. So those are ways to kind of plus and minus how you're funding schools. And then I'm getting the hook from Steve, so do we have time for questions? Or? That's 4 hours of presentation, 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think you might have blown them out though, but yeah.
Marty. In our county, yeah. So first five in our county sits within our ECE department. So they live there even though it's a separate entity. So they're part of all these discussions. Through the years, we've received first five funding, and then some years we haven't. We collaborate with them, but they're part of all those discussions, yeah.
Question over there, Alyssa.
I'm curious about how you manage the reporting requirements or the compliance requirements associated with the 30 different funding streams in a way that's really manageable.
Very carefully. So the question was, how do I manage all the requirements? And this was my complaint or my comment to the state today, because all the dollars are coming down in silos and not allowing a lot of flexibility, and often come with some pretty onerous requirements. What that spreadsheet actually lets us do is to make sure that the dollars and the percentage of pay are lined up with the amount of time staff are doing those different roles. So I'll use our CSEC program, for instance. We're having like a 5.5% cost increase in that program, but social services gives me a fixed amount of funding. So there's this big difference. Either I lay her off, I move her to 80%, or she does something different. So we were able to look at that spreadsheet and go, okay, I have a little bit of extra money through Department of Rehabilitation. I can take that 20% and now have her do 2 jobs. So I get to keep my CSEC program, but I also get to grow her as a staff in my agency and learn something different and have her do a day a week for our Department of Rehabilitation, and then she time codes to that. It's difficult because you're tracking a lot. I couldn't do it without that spreadsheet. And then we set up her personnel accounting report form to reflect that, and that keeps us pretty safe. We have another tool that monitors every single grant that comes in, what the due dates are, how much it's bringing in, when does it twilight, and when do we really need to think about fixing something, because we're all looking at a real big fiscal cliff. Community school is great, but it's going to end in 3 or 4 years. CYBHI, great, but it's going to end. So how do we create a predictive map of how we can continue the funding for staff?